Welcome to Speaking Opera. This is a podcast all about opera and the world of opera. Today I have a special guest, somebody very, very special to me because somebody I have been a fan for many, many years now, although he's much younger than I am, of course. And this gentleman lives in Paris, and he is with us today. On June 14th of 2019, I was at the Boston Early Music Festival's performance of Steffani's Orlando Generoso, and I saw this fellow on stage, and I was like totally amazed. And I will put myself out because I think in opera and in music, it's always subjective. But this gentleman that is our guest today has the it factor. He had everything. His beautiful voice, incredible musicality, and stage presence. If you haven't seen him on stage, really see him on stage. We'll talk about I Gemelli later on, but there are some videos that are available on YouTube where you can watch this gentleman. And his name is Zachary Wilder. Zachary, welcome. Glad you can be with us from Paris.
Thank you for having me, Howard. It's a real pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. I understand you're now doing Il Re Pastore of Mozart. You're in performance.
Yeah, we just actually finished. It was a concert performance in Budapest with Rolando Villazon and Christina Pluhar conducting, as well as Emeka Barat, Tamara Ivanis, and Elena Sancho. It was really fun to do. It's a really fun piece. It should be done more often, and if you get a really good group of singers together, it's a nice evening.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I saw there were some snippets that I watched on Instagram from the performance it looks like a lot of fun. And you're working with Villazon. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's really nice he's extremely supportive colleague, and he likes to support other singers in this industry, which is not necessarily always an easy industry. He's just a wonderful energy, and to share the stage with him and see all of what he's leaving on stage, which is basically everything, is really inspiring. So it was a real honor. And actually, the first opera I ever saw was La Traviata with him in singing Alfredo. So that was sort of a full circle for me.
That's very interesting. Very interesting. So could you, for our listeners who perhaps are less familiar with your background, could you tell us a bit about your musical background, where you studied, or and so forth? Yeah.
Yeah, most definitely. I grew up in Los Angeles. My family is a musical family. My father works in the pop music industry and film. He actually wrote the music to the Disney film Mulan. He's written for a lot of different pop stars. And so growing up, I had these, at the time he was working with a lot of R&B singers like Patti LaBelle. And I would just sit in the studio and listen and learn from these amazing R&B singers. And I think my father tells this story about how he was asking a certain singer to sing a certain phrase a certain way, and then there's this little voice came out from the corner, and the singer turned around saying, "Where did that come from?" And it was just me, like 9 years old, singing it back. And ever since then, I went to a lot of schools in Los Angeles that were very musically oriented. My middle school, but especially my high school, which was Hamilton Academy of Music in Los Angeles, and they were really focused on jazz and musical theater. So I got I credit a lot of my stage chops to having been in the musical theater arena with all of these sort of Los Angeles kids that a lot of them ended up on Broadway. It was a pretty amazing place to be, but there was also choir, and eventually towards the end of that, I became curious. My grandmother was an opera singer actually, and so I was very curious about what that was like. And so I started taking voice lessons with a man named Michael Stevens at the Colburn School in Los Angeles. And as a sort of test, he sent me home with Don Ottavio's arias. And I was like, oh, this is exciting. And I came back the next lesson and sang them for him. And it went better than he was expecting. And he said, wow, you could actually maybe do this for a career. And I fell in love with it, mostly because not only music was amazing, but just the sort of concentration and athleticism that this type of singing demands of the singer, and precision. It was just so exciting to me. And so 6 months later, I auditioned for a bunch of conservatories, and I got into the Eastman School of Music. And the Eastman School, I was very happy and lucky to receive a scholarship there. So I felt that since they were willing to invest, and it was such an amazing institution, to go there. And there I initially studied with John Malloy, and then moved to working with Robert Swenson. And then after that, I went and did my master's in Houston, Texas at the University of Houston. And then after landed in Boston, because my first job actually was at the Boston Music Festival. Oh, and at University of Houston, I studied with Catherine Trzynski. But that kind of that happened. And then also after that was Tanglewood. So Boston felt like a good place for me to land as a sort of manageable, middle-class musician, getting his bearings. And that's sort of the beginning of all my studies and my musical background.
That's amazing. It's amazing. So how did you end up in Paris?
Oh my goodness. Well, I suppose we should probably work our way backwards in terms of how I even ended up in Baroque music to begin with. Because when I was at Eastman, somebody said to me, wow, you have this really flexible voice. You should maybe try working with the audition for the Collegium Musicum, which was a Baroque ensemble. And I didn't know very much about anything about that. And so I showed up in the class, and there was this man with a very, very large beard and a very large lute, named Paul Odette. And I had no idea who that was. And I was completely blown away. The first things we worked on, I think, were Roman oratorios by Mazzocchi and Carissimi. And it was I just was completely taken also with the philosophy behind the performance practice movement. And so I took all of his courses from then on. And I also, at my time there, befriended Christian Bezuidenhout, the harpsichord and now mostly forte pianist, and ended up taking as many coachings and classes as I could in the field. And after that, Christian had suggested I audition for the Boston Music Festival, which is how I ended up getting that job initially. And so once I left school, I was working in the United States with a lot of the wonderful ensembles that there are out there, particularly also in Houston, Texas. Since I did my master's there, there was a couple of Baroque orchestras there, one of whom being Mercury Houston. And what ended up happening was they hired me to do Renaud in Lully's Armide, which was a big, I was just out of school, and it was a big role for me, but it was very exciting. And they had invited a stage director, this French stage director named Pascal Rambert, who has a theater just outside. At the time, he was the director of a theater just outside of Paris called the Théâtre de Gennevilliers. And so we did the performance in Houston, and then we got invited to perform it in Paris. And what ended up happening is pretty hilarious, because I think the Parisians were pretty shocked that a Texan Baroque orchestra was coming to France to perform French Baroque music for French people. And so everybody was extremely intrigued, and everybody came. The Festival d'Aix-en-Provence, Les Arts Florissants, um, Ivan Alexandre, all these different people came and saw the production, and from that, my career essentially started in France because I was then late afterwards invited to perform at the Festival d'Aix-en-Provence. And there, my relationship with Leonardo Alarcon began. And then also, I was later accepted into the Jardin des Voix, which is William Christie's sort of young artist talent search showcase program, and ended up doing that. And from thenceforth, I just started working more and more in France. And I met my partner here, and so that sort of sealed the deal.
That's an interesting journey.
I'd say.
So I sort of dovetail on what you just said. I was going to ask you, since your career for the most part has been based around 17th and 18th century music.
I think that because Baroque music has a very intense relationship to and very fast harmonic push in how it functions, and a lot of the melodies are really based in very, very harmonic, against the harmony in certain sense, especially like with Bach or with. But I think that the sort of immediacy, or what we like to call sprezzatura of, which is a sort of studied nonchalance, really spoke to my studies of jazz and musical theater and pop music, because I think that the music, the sort of priorities that this music asks for from the performers, has a lot that it shares with these other repertoires. And so that was sort of the initial kind of draw for me. And then what I found really about the performance practice movement and the philosophy of kind of examining what was going on at the time, and like the intentions of the composer and the instruments, and seeing how that has an effect on how we perform all music. I mean, and this philosophy can be pushed all the way up to early 20th century repertoire, because things like steel strings, for example, in orchestras, was not really a standard practice until the 1950s after World War II, and was born out of necessity for a shortage of gut. And so when you think about how those things kind of transform the way that we perform music, and then examining backwards, like how maybe we might perform this music differently, I just thought that sort of historical context and very, and putting it into practice, like when we say performance practice or historically informed performance, how fascinating and exciting that all was. And so I think that those two sort of elements, the similarity with what I was doing before, plus this sort of intense philosophical element, was really what drew me into it. And also having a teacher like Paul Odette available, and Christian, and also his wife Crystal Thielmann, they're these sort of luminaries, was so exciting. But that said, I mean, before I moved to Europe, I was doing my tastes are pretty varied and wide, but I think that what ended up also sounding special in my voice was those repertoires.
I discovered something on YouTube the other day that I don't know why I had not seen it before, of you singing the sailor song from Purcell's Dido. How did that happen? I guess I'll have to say to listeners, you'll have to check out YouTube, and I'll put a link in the description when I post this. But it's fabulous. And it was like, it surprised me, and not really surprised me, but it was wonderful. And the audience went wild. How did that all happen? Was it a competition or something like that?
Yeah, this was the Chesty competition in 2012, and it was funny because they were going to be doing Dido, and so for the tenor, all there is the sailor song, and so that was really that was one of the required arias that I was required to do. And what was really funny was I showed up at the dress rehearsal for the final, and they started playing, and they played the entire intro, the 45-second sailor song, as well as like the 2-minute chorus afterwards. And I said, what am I going to do for, more than 3/4 of my stage time when I'm not singing? And I was talking with my friend at the time, because I knew that I knew that I had to do something, and she was going to be doing the Jardin des Voix with me the following year, Emily Renard, and she's an amazing singer and amazing at stagecraft as well. And I said to her, "Do you think I should do a dance?" And she said, "Oh yeah, I mean, if you're gonna go down, at least go down in flames."
I
And so I
I'm
was in
an
my little like
inflations.
Austrian hotel room, like, that was like this big, like trying to plan out to do something. Made a whole Shayna, and then showed up and did it in the competition, and it was very silly. And for some reason, it has an exorbitant amount of views on YouTube.
It's
But
wonderful.
it was
It's
fun. I
wonderful.
think, in the end, even if you're doing something like a competition or an audition or anything like that, in the end, what people remember is that you gave a performance. And so that's what I opted for.
It's wonderful. Since we're on the subject and it sort of works into this, I wanted to mention one of the highlights last year of my theater and opera and music going travels and journey was I Gemelli. And you were incredible, and the ensemble is incredible. Could you tell us a bit about that? About how it happened and how it came together?
Well, Emiliano Gonzalez Toro, who is a friend of mine, he had initially started the ensemble to be basically experts in this, particularly in Seicento, but they're also branching out into some other languages like French music, and they do also some jazz and some other projects. But the foundational, with his experience in Italian 17th century music, he had started the ensemble, and a lot of this music has duets for tenors. And we ended up meeting briefly before, but really the first time that we really got to know each other as singers was on the Raphael Pichon's production of the Monteverdi Vespers. And it was the first time that I felt that I was with another singing partner, another tenor, who took an as athletic approach and had a similar philosophy in this music that I felt was what I desired in this music as well. And we both kind of were like, wow, we got to do these duets in the Vespers in a way that we had never had an opportunity to necessarily do before. And he said, "Oh, I want to do more work with you." He invited me to perform as Pastore in Orfeo, and then after that, he said, "We really need to do a tenor duet album, because there are so much repertoire that's out there that for two tenors in this repertoire, and for the name I Gemelli, it also makes sense." And so we went upon this journey of finding all this different repertoire that was not Monteverdi, actually, because that's the stuff that we all know, but people like D'India or Calestani or Gregori or any of these other lesser known composers who were sort of in the shadow of Monteverdi, and we started working on that together. And the album became sort of this evident thing. We had a residence that we did together where we were able to go through and sing through just piles and piles, like this much repertoire. There's so much out there, and we chose really the best of the best that we could find, and stuff that was really pleasing. We wanted an album that was going to be ecstatic and show all of the different elements of this type of vocalism. And then this album, A Room of Mirrors, was born, and thus also the preceding recitals after that. And it's been really fun. I mean, when you get to a certain point in your life and your career where you get to have these collaborations and you get to choose these collaborations with people that you really enjoy working with, and it's so much fun every time we come back to the recital. It's always a bit different, and it's always so much fun, and the audience always really responds wonderfully to it. So it's been a joy.
I don't know if I should use the word choreograph, but when I went to Morgan Library in New York City to see you there uh, with E. Gemelli, it was mind-boggling. The singing and the performance were incredible, but the whole movement of the whole group was just something special. Is it? So I have to ask you a question out of curiosity. Is it choreographed, or is it because it feels so spontaneous? It really does.
I mean, what's wonderful about a group like this, especially since, there's sort of a core group of instrumentalists, and when you're doing this repertoire as well, you're not just duetting with the other tenor, you're also duetting with the basso continuo, which is all of the harp and the organ and the harpsichord and the lutes. And what's great is that these people are people that get to play together a lot. And so when one person throws out an idea, there's other people that are there to catch them. And so it's a little different every time. There's some stuff that we've learned really works really well. So there is stuff that does come back that we love. But it's the same thing with me and Emiliano. Like if I throw out an idea, or if he throws out an idea, one or the other is going to catch onto it and take it and run with it. And so, no, there's a lot of improv. It's sort of structured improv, I would call it, in that respect.
That's actually a good answer. I know being in the audience, it was just the incredible energy from the stage. It just poured into the room, and the whole audience, as you know, you were receiving it, but we went wild at the end because it was just such good energy. And it went on, and I like the fact that you didn't, I think it was about an hour and a half, and there was no intermission, which I really like. I think people should take a look at that in certain kinds of music anyway. Sometimes an intermission is not helpful. And believe me, I was hardly the only one there. It was huge success and wonderful. And thank you. And thank you to the group as well. So,
It was a pleasure.
so out of curiosity, I guess, another question I might ask you is, what kind of music do you listen to when you're not performing 17th and 18th century music? What would you listen to in the house?
I have a pretty wide taste in music. A lot of in the classical realm, a lot of piano repertoire. Um, in fact, and symphonic music. But I also, having grown up in the household that I did with two hippie parents, things such as Joni Mitchell or Steely Dan or any of these sort of like amazing predecessors, but are part of the catalog of things that I love to listen to. Or I'm always also looking for new things, and sometimes just some really guilty kind of pleasure pop music is also. It really depends on my mood in that respect, but yeah, and it's funny because my partner is Belgian with some Italian background, and so he listens to a lot of like Mina,
Oh, I
which
love
I've
Mina.
gotten really interested in.
Mhm.
Which she's an amazing singer. She's sort of the Barbara Streisand, I would say, of Italy, and that's really fun to listen to. And a lot of French music like Barbara or Dalida or any of these kind of Jacques Brel, this sort of French chanson, Juliette, these types of folks. That's also really great. So I try to keep my playlist extremely eclectic, because I think You can learn a lot from a lot of different places, and and also it's important to have fun.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's an interesting answer to your question, to my question. And I am a huge fan of Barbara. I have all of her recordings. And my French is not good, but she's so wonderful, and she's an example for me, and I think Mina's also the same, on some level, or I know some Italian. There's so much in the music that's expressed that you don't need to know every word. It's in the feeling of the music. So. And what music have you not performed that you would like to perform in the future? Or maybe or
I
roles?
mean, I've been very lucky to perform a lot of repertoire that I have set out to do, and that's been wonderful. My voice has sort of been opening up a lot recently. I'm pushing 40, and so there's some really interesting things that happen for the voice and the body, and I have some more Mozart on the horizon, which is really exciting. Planned, and but there's some roles like I was during the pandemic I was supposed to be doing Dardanus by Rameau, which is sort of a dream role for me, and unfortunately it was canceled. It was supposed to be at Trinity Wall Street, and Caramore. um, so I hope I get to do that at some point. But I love singing Rameau. I love all the Mozart roles, and I'm hoping that I get to do more of like the Da Ponte trilogy. Um, and but I did have one friend who said to me that the most important thing is in your ambitions is to be vague in your ambitions, and stay open to repertoires. So
Mhm.
um, if eventually things move into either more lyric or into medieval repertoire, that also would tickle my fancy in that respect. With Frottole, or Lenski. These
Really?
types of things are I love, and I've always had a very broad taste. But just as a matter of whether when if and when these opportunities present themselves as well.
Interesting. Are you coming back to the US anytime soon?
I'm going to be coming just to do a recording in June. Actually, it's a recording with my father that I'm doing based on the history of my family from that side of from my father's side. They were all musicians, immigrants from Lithuania. They all played different varying instruments. My grandmother was in the Met competition in the 1950s. And they used to get together after dinner and make music together of varying repertoires of Schubert and Brahms and Mozart, but then also Yiddish theater music, and also some Tin Pan Alley and American Songbook. And so I've created this sort of imaginary sort of family salon that we're going to record in June. But in terms of next season, I'm still waiting to see if it may be a very U.S. light season next season. But the pandemic sort of kind of shifted my career a lot more Europe side, but that's not for lack of want or for trying to come back. So I'll make it happen.
You will. You will. You're a person who makes things happen. This has been
I
delightful.
try.
Okay, so I do want to turn to something that I will leave on here if you're okay with it, because I'm always fascinated. I love singers. It's no secret, and I love opera. And I find it very interesting that singers and musicians that I know that I'm close to all have pastimes and things that they do. They're something different than anything somebody might guess they do. And I know that you knit. And can you tell us a little bit about that? I'm kind of curious myself.
Yeah, definitely. Well, to kind of give a little background, my mother's side of the family are all visual artists. So my mother's a painter, and my grandmother was also a painter. And there's a lot of woodworkers and people who work with their hands. And as you know, music is a very ephemeral art form. Once you've performed, it sort of is gone. Some people, I don't know what the quote is, but it decorates time basically, and then once the time is over, the music is gone. And so I was really desiring to make something with my hands. And one day I was in Portland, Oregon, with Portland Baroque doing the Messiah. And I turn and see that my colleague, Laura Pudwell, who's a wonderful mezzo-soprano, was knitting some socks. And I said, "Oh, that's perfect." And so I said to her, "Can you teach me the basics?" And she says, "Yeah, sure. Just go to there was a knitting store that was just literally 3 blocks away." So I went over there, got the supplies, and started knitting the most hideous scarf. I still have it, but usually your first project is a disaster. And I came to discover later that there's actually quite a large community of knitting opera singers. It's sort of the perfect opera hobby. And even people like Joan Sutherland was sort of famously was often knitting backstage, because it can occupy your spirit while you're waiting to be either used or while you're traveling. And it's ever since then I've been learning more and more about it, and have made lots of made lots of things that. And what's great about it is that when I look at a sweater, for example, that I've made, I can say, "Oh, I remember when I made that. That was this production in 2017. I made this sweater, and I remember I was feeling this way." And there's sort of these. It crystallizes time in a sort of artifact, which is, I think, pretty nifty.
It's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I was curious. I will tell a little story that I told you earlier, but I think I'll repeat it if you're okay with that. When we became friends on social media after the Orlando Generoso, I had sent you a message. If I come and see you in as many performances as possible, will you make me a scarf? And you wrote back, "We'll talk in a few years." So I was saying, this guy's okay. This is fun. So you have a wonderful sense of humor. And I probably wanted to get a scarf. I don't know. Who knows? Who knows? Life, I think keeping the joy in life is always important. And you certainly do that in your performances. I look forward to seeing you again in hopefully, when you come back to the States. COVID has really affected all of us in different ways. And my musician friends, especially, I think have all suffered from all the not being able to travel. And, just the whole COVID shutdown was horrific for everybody. And so we're regaining our oomph. I just returned from a week of Puccini, and nothing could destroy my feeling right now. I am totally fixed. I saw 3 people I'm very close to who are all very active in the theater, in opera, and seeing them in success just made me feel like I can do anything. So on the other side of the performer, which I'm not, we are fed in a way. My friend Benton Hess always says, the singers know where the water is, and so you have to fill it, and I get what he means by that. And it's so there's a joy both ways. So when we
I think it's really a sort of balm for our post-COVID ills of kind of social. We need these experiences that theater gives us, and I think we can easily forget that it's there for us, and that we're there for each other, because just as much as maybe an audience needs to see something, the performers need an audience. And so it's as you said, it's something that we share together. And actually Benton taught at Eastman, and
Yes,
I
did.
actually studied with him.
You did.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
very interesting. I've done a few podcasts with Benton. Benton and I have been friends for a long time. I'm double your age, by the way. And we knew each other from when he was at New England Conservatory of Music, and I had some close friends who were there. and so forth. So I used to go to his house and we'd listen to music together. That was a long time ago, a long, long time ago. And we regained our, we never were not friends, but we didn't see each other for many years. And now through social media, there are things to be said for social media. I have reconnected with people that I haven't seen since, well, that was the 1960s. So I'll give you an idea. It was a while ago. And we used to play Inga Borg records and so forth. But it was, I felt as if when I saw him, and he has a magical quality about him. He's like a Pied Piper in a way, and really, I'm using kind of a musical metaphor, but I felt like I had just seen him the other day, and that's the kind of friendship that I treasure those at this point in my life. Those relationships are so important, where they're timeless. You were very warm to me after E. Gemelli. I felt like we hadn't seen each other in a long time, and you have a great warmth also, and it comes through in your performance. It does.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think that's the sort of mystical thing about singing too, is I think you get to feel a lot about the person, and so it's important for us singers to work on ourselves as well as people in order to be better singers.
On that note, I will thank you. That was perfect. I just want to thank you for spending the time today in your busy schedule. I know you just did a tour of St. Matthew Passions, right?
Yeah, only 12 of them.
Only. Was it?
Oh, I think I can put that piece away for a bit.
Yeah, I know. I was following it because I was fascinated by it. You were saying all over. Well, you're in different countries, I think, right?
Yeah, I was in France, Germany, Switzerland, Spain, and Korea. So it was fun. It was a nice tour. And in the end, I actually got to jump in for the event. I jumped into another St. Matthew Passion to do the evangelist there, and then I also jumped in as the evangelist at the end of that tour, because tis the season also for colds and laryngitis. So depending upon which side of the laryngitis you're on, you can end up doing quite a lot of work or very little.
That's something I think, not to demean in any way, I think we all can suffer from various colds and other things like this, but a singer is really, you have the toughest lot, because it's not strings and it's not a keyboard. Not that I feel for anyone who's ill, but singers really are dependent on their health in every way. It's really,
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, there's no worse feeling than having to cancel something or having to sing through something and you're not feeling your best, which, it's pretty common. And, people, it does surprise me that sometimes people just don't, even within ensembles, like other musicians, are not very conscientious, and you'll end up hanging out at dinner with somebody and then you see them pulling out and blowing their nose and you're like, wait, I've been with you for the past hour. Like, and some even instrumentalists, they don't really understand that, they just think that we're princesses in a certain sense in that regard, because they're like, oh, I don't understand, why can't you just sing sick? And it's like, literally they're just two tiny little, and if they get inflamed, then that's the end of it. Like we can't sing on them. So tricky.
Thank you for doing this today.
Yeah, thank you so much for setting this up. It was a real pleasure to speak with you.
It was fun. I look forward to seeing you in performance again. Next year I'll be in Italy off and on, and maybe I won't be so far away. We can connect somehow. We'll see.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll be there.
Where in Italy are you going to be?
I'm based out of Rome because I have a friend who has a house there. And
wow.
I know. Yeah, we both work in social work, but he did the smart side. So for years, but we're close friends. The house is always open to me, and he's a very close friend. So it's time. I'm studying Italian. I'm waiting for I want to do my next chapter. So I'm going to do some interviews with singers, Italian singers. I already have some of it lined up. but I want to be a little bit more comfortable with Italian, even though I'll be doing the interview in English, so that if there's a problem with words and that kind of thing, that I have. And also, why not? Why not? It's a beautiful
That's great.
language. So anyway, but I hope to see you. Maybe we can work something out when I'm in Europe. We'll see how it goes.
Would love that. Would love that.
Great. Thanks again for doing this today.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you so much.
Okay. Ciao.
Speaking Opera focuses on documenting the career activities of currently active singers, composers, musicians, and authors in the field of operatic performance and scholarship, and specialists in the field of audio recording, as well as those who have retired fully or partially from performing and/or teaching. Under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.